Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Wildlife Preservation Station hung in space like a metallic flower, its petals of reinforced titanium catching the amber light of Nethros Prime's twin suns. Inside its most heavily secured wing, the one with the triple redundant containment fields and the warning signs in 43 languages, something absolutely ridiculous was happening. Dr. Nia was having a tea party. Well, not exactly a tea party in the traditional sense. There were no delicate porcelain cups or cucumber sandwiches. Instead, there were 3 of the galaxy's most feared apex predators sitting in a rough circle, each with their own specialized feeding bowl, while a human woman in a lab coat poured what looked suspiciously like chocolate milk into each container. "Now, Fang," Nia said, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone addressing a particularly stubborn toddler. "You know the rules. No dissolving the furniture with your venom just because you're excited about snack time." The Vorthak Deathstalker cub, a creature whose adult form could liquefy a grown Altarian in under 30 seconds, looked up at her with what could only be described as puppy dog eyes. His obsidian carapace gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his tail, tipped with a stinger that contained enough neurotoxin to drop a space whale, swished back and forth like an overeager dog's. Fang made a sound that was part purr, part mechanical whir, and entirely endearing if you ignored the fact that it came from a biological weapon designed by evolution to be the perfect killing machine. "That's better," Nia said, scratching behind what passed for his ears. The gesture would have horrified xenobiologists across the galaxy. Vorthak Deathstalkers were supposed to be untouchable, their neural pathways hardwired for aggression and territorial dominance. Yet here was Fang, practically melting under the attention like butter in a hot pan. Spike, meanwhile, was having his own moment of domesticated bliss. The crystalline Gorvani razor beast had folded his 6 legs beneath him and was making a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. His translucent body caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls, which would have been beautiful if you could forget that those same crystal formations could extend into monomolecular blades capable of slicing through starship hull plating. "You're such a good boy," Nia cooed, running her hand along his smooth surface. Spike's internal light pulsed in response, cycling through colors that supposedly indicated contentment. The fact that anyone knew what contentment looked like in a Gorvani razor beast was itself a minor miracle of xenobiology. Whisper, the shadow phase Delvian night hunter, was perhaps the most unsettling of the 3, if only because she kept flickering in and out of visible existence. One moment she was there, a sleek, feline form with fur that seemed to absorb light itself, and the next she was just a vague shimmer in the air. Her species had evolved the ability to phase partially out of normal space-time, making them nearly impossible to track or contain. Nearly impossible, that is, unless you happen to be a human with an apparently supernatural ability to make friends with things that should by all rights want to eat you. "Whisper, sweetheart," Nia said, without even looking in the cat-like predator's direction. "I can sense you trying to phase behind me for a surprise pounce. We've talked about this. No ambush tactics during snack time." A guilty-sounding chirp came from somewhere near the ceiling, and Whisper materialized fully, looking for all the world like she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. She padded over to her bowl with the kind of exaggerated innocence that only cats, even interdimensional shadow cats, could manage. The scene would have been heartwarming if it weren't taking place in what was essentially a maximum security prison, for the galaxy's most dangerous juvenile delinquents. The Galactic Wildlife Preservation Station had been humanity's answer to a growing crisis. As space travel became more common, encounters with hostile alien wildlife had skyrocketed. Traditional approaches, containment, relocation, or, in extreme cases, extermination, had proven inadequate. The Galactic Council had been on the verge of declaring several species too dangerous to coexist with civilized society, when humanity had stepped forward with a proposal so audacious it bordered on insanity. "Let us try," they had said. "Let us see if we can find another way." The other species had laughed. The Altarians, with their rigid hierarchical society, had called it typical human naivety. The Zenthari collective had dismissed it as biological impossibility. Even the usually diplomatic Etherians had politely suggested that humans might be overestimating their capabilities. They weren't laughing anymore. Nia had been running the program for 3 standard years now, and the results spoke for themselves. Creatures that had been written off as irredeemably savage were learning to coexist not just with other species, but with the wider galactic community. The secret, as Nia had discovered, wasn't domination or conditioning. It was something far simpler and infinitely more complex. It was family. Humans, it turned out, had an almost pathological need to adopt things. It didn't matter if those things had fangs, claws, venom, or the ability to phase through solid matter. Show a human an orphaned creature in need of care, and their response was as predictable as gravity. "Well, I guess you're coming home with me now." The other species found this baffling. The Vorthak, for instance, abandoned their young after birth, expecting them to survive on instinct and aggression alone. The concept of nurturing a predator into something resembling a pet was so foreign to them that they literally didn't have words for it in their language. But here was the evidence, purring and chirping and occasionally phasing through furniture in pursuit of a favorite toy. "All right, everyone," Nia announced, clapping her hands together. "Snack time's over. You know what comes next." 3 pairs of eyes. Well, 2 pairs, and whatever whisper used for visual input while phased, turned toward her with expressions of eager anticipation. If anyone had told the Galactic Council that apex predators could look excited about nap time, they would have been laughed out of the chamber. Fong was the first to move, scuttling over to his designated sleeping area with the enthusiasm of a child heading to bed with a favorite stuffed animal. His sleeping spot was a carefully climate-controlled alcove that mimicked the sulphurous caves of his homeworld, complete with heated rocks and a gentle mist of acidic vapor that would have melted most organic materials. Spike followed, his crystalline form chiming softly as he settled into his own specially designed rest area. The Gorvani required specific light frequencies for proper rest, and his sleeping chamber was equipped with a complex array of photonic emitters that cycled through the precise spectrum needed for healthy development. Whisper, predictably, simply vanished. Her sleeping arrangements were the most complex of the 3, involving a pocket of folded spacetime that existed partially outside normal reality. The engineering team had needed 6 months and 3 nervous breakdowns to construct it, but the result was a space where a shadow phase predator could rest without accidentally phasing through the station's hull. "Sweet dreams, you little monsters," Nia said softly, her voice carrying the kind of affection usually reserved for beloved pets or small children. The fact that these particular pets could theoretically level a small city was apparently irrelevant. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside caught her attention. Heavy, measured steps, with the distinctive rhythm of someone trying very hard to project authority, while simultaneously being terrified of what they might encounter. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a figure that Nia recognized immediately from the briefing materials she'd received that morning. Director Nex of the Galactic Council's Xenobiological Assessment Division stood in the doorway, his pale blue skin slightly darker than usual, a sure sign of stress in his species. Nex was a Drachmarie, a species known for their methodical approach to problem-solving and their complete inability to understand why anyone would voluntarily spend time around dangerous animals. His large, dark eyes swept the room, taking in the specialized habitats, the feeding stations, and the various toys scattered around what looked like the galaxy's most expensive daycare center. "Dr. Nia, I presume?" His voice carried the formal tone of someone conducting official business, but there was an underlying current of barely controlled panic. "I am Director Nex. I believe you received notification of my inspection visit?" "Of course," Nia replied, wiping her hands on a towel that bore suspicious scorch marks. "Welcome to the nursery. I hope you don't mind, but the children just went down for their afternoon nap, so we'll need to keep our voices down." Nex blinked slowly, a gesture that in his species indicated either deep thought or complete bewilderment. "Children? Well, what else would you call them?" Nia gestured toward the 3 sleeping areas, where the faint sounds of contented predators could be heard. Fang was making a soft rumbling noise that might have been snoring, while Spike's internal light pulsed in the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. Whisper was, of course, invisible, but the occasional shimmer in the air suggested she was dreaming of something that required a lot of running. "I would call them," Nex said carefully, "extremely dangerous apex predators that have been responsible for numerous fatalities across multiple star systems." "Oh, that," Nia waved a hand dismissively. "That's just because nobody ever taught them proper manners. You'd be amazed what a little structure and affection can accomplish." Nex stared at her for a long moment, then at the sleeping predators, then back at her. His expression suggested he was reconsidering several fundamental assumptions about reality. "Perhaps," he said finally, "you could walk me through your methodology?" Nia led Director Nex through the facility, with the casual confidence of someone giving a tour of their living room rather than a maximum security containment facility for galactic-class threats. The corridors were wider than standard station architecture required, with reinforced walls that could theoretically withstand a direct hit from a plasma cannon. Theoretically being the operative word, since nobody really wanted to test that particular specification. "The key thing to understand," Nia was saying as they walked, "is that aggression in most species is a response to fear or territorial pressure. Remove those stressors, provide consistent care and boundaries, and you'd be surprised how quickly even the most supposedly savage creatures adapt to social structures." Nex nodded politely, while mentally cataloging the various ways this conversation could end with him being dissolved, crystallized, or phased into another dimension. His species had evolved as prey animals, and every instinct he possessed was currently screaming at him to run in the opposite direction. They paused at an observation window that looked into what Nia cheerfully called the playroom. It was a vast chamber filled with obstacles, climbing structures, and what appeared to be an elaborate obstacle course designed by someone with a deeply concerning imagination. "This is where we conduct socialization exercises," Nia explained. "It's important that they get plenty of physical activity, especially at their age." Growing. Predators need outlets for their natural behaviors, or they get cranky. "Cranky," Nex repeated slowly. "Oh yes. You should have seen Fang last month when we had to delay his exercise period due to a maintenance issue. He spent the entire day sulking in his alcove and refused to eat his favorite treats. It was absolutely heartbreaking. Before Nex could fully process the image of a Death Stalker having a tantrum, the station's emergency klaxons began to wail. The sound was deafening, designed to cut through hull plating and reach every corner of the facility. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an ominous glow, and automated voices began reciting evacuation procedures in multiple languages. Emergency protocols activated. All personnel report to designated emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Nex's survival instincts, already on high alert, kicked into overdrive. His species' fight-or-flight response was heavily weighted toward flight, and he found himself backing toward what he hoped was the nearest exit. Around them, station personnel were running through the corridors with the controlled panic of people who had drilled for this moment but never actually expected it to happen. "We need to evacuate immediately," Nex said, his voice tight with barely controlled terror. "If there's a hull breach or system failure, those creatures could—" He stopped mid-sentence, because Nia wasn't moving. She was standing calmly in the middle of the corridor, apparently unbothered by the chaos erupting around them. Even more unsettling, she was smiling. "Shouldn't we be running?" Nex asked. "Probably," Nia agreed. "But first, let's check on the children." Before Nex could protest, she was walking back toward the nursery. Every rational thought in his head told him to flee in the opposite direction, but something about her complete lack of concern made him follow. It was like watching someone walk calmly through a meteor shower, so fundamentally wrong that it became hypnotically fascinating. They reached the nursery just as the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in harsh red shadows. The klaxons were even louder here, echoing off the reinforced walls with enough volume to wake the dead. Or, apparently, 3 sleeping predators. Fang emerged from his alcove first, his obsidian carapace gleaming wetly in the emergency lighting. His tail was raised, stinger extended, and his compound eyes were scanning the room for threats. The sound he made was no longer a purr. It was the kind of low, menacing growl that had given his species their reputation as unstoppable killing machines. Spike was next, his crystalline form blazing with internal light as his defensive systems activated. The gentle chimes of his contentment had been replaced by a harsh, discordant resonance that made Nex's teeth ache. Sharp edges were beginning to form along his previously smooth surfaces, monomolecular blades that could slice through anything short of neutronium. Whisper materialized fully for perhaps the first time since Nex had arrived, her shadow-dark form crackling with barely contained energy. Her eyes, if they could be called eyes, were fixed on the emergency lights with the predatory focus of something that had just identified potential prey. This was what Nex had expected to see from the beginning. These weren't pets or children. They were apex predators in their element, every genetic instinct honed by millions of years of evolution suddenly awakened and ready for violence. "Doctor," Nex whispered, not daring to move, "I think we should leave. Now." The 3 predators turned toward them in perfect synchronization, their attention focused with laser precision on the 2 figures standing in the doorway. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Nobody moved. Then Nia stepped forward. "Hey there, babies," she said, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she'd used during snack time. I know. All those loud noises are scary, aren't they?" The predators looked at her, then at each other, then back at her. Fang's tail slowly lowered. Spike's internal light shifted from harsh white to a softer amber. Whisper tilted her head with an expression that somehow managed to convey confusion despite her alien features. "It's just practice," Nia continued, moving closer to the three creatures with the kind of casual confidence that would have given a xenobiologist nightmares. You remember practice drills, don't you? All noise and flashing lights, but nothing to worry about. She reached out and scratched behind Fang's carapace ridge. The Deathstalker's growl shifted back to his familiar purr, and his stinger retracted completely. "That's my good boy," Nia murmured, then turned to Spike. "And you, sweetie, you don't need all those sharp edges. Nobody's trying to hurt anyone here." Spike's crystalline blades slowly retracted, his form returning to the smooth, rainbow-casting surface that Nex had seen earlier. The harsh resonance faded back to gentle chimes. "And whisper," Nia said, not even looking in the Shadow Hunter's direction. "I can feel you getting ready to phase strike. But there's no threat here, is there? Just some silly alarms making too much noise." Whisper made a sound that might have been a sigh, and settled back into her fully material form, the crackling energy around her dissipating like morning mist. Within moments, all three predators had returned to their previous state of domesticated contentment. Fang was actually leaning into Nia's scratches, his eyes half closed in bliss. Spike was making happy chiming sounds and cycling through pleasant colors. Whisper had begun to fade back toward invisibility, but it was the relaxed transparency of someone getting comfortable, not the aggressive phasing of a hunter preparing to strike. "There we go," Nia said softly. "Much better. Now, why don't you all go back to your naps? I promise the loud noises will stop soon." As if responding to a suggestion rather than a command, the three predators began moving back toward their sleeping areas. Fang paused to nuzzle against Nia's leg before disappearing into his alcove. Spike chimed a gentle good-night melody. Whisper simply faded away, presumably returning to her pocket dimension. Within minutes, the nursery had returned to its previous state of peaceful quiet, the only sounds being the distant klaxons and the soft breathing of sleeping predators. Nex stood in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Everything he knew about xenobiology, about predator behavior, about the fundamental nature of these species, had just been casually overturned by a human woman with a talent for speaking to dangerous animals as if they were beloved pets. "How?" he finally managed to ask. Nia turned to face him, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression was completely serious. "Director Nex," she said, "what do you know about pack bonding?" "Pack bonding?" Nex repeated. "It's a social structure observed in some species, usually involving hierarchical relationships within family or tribal groups. But these creatures don't form packs. Their species are solitary hunters, territorial and aggressive toward their own kind." "That's true," Nia agreed. "In their natural environments, with their own species. But humans are different. We're what you might call universal pack bonders. We form family units with almost anything, given enough time and patience." She gestured toward the sleeping areas where the predators rested. "These aren't my pets, Director. They're my children. And I'm not their trainer or their keeper. I'm their pack leader, their protector, their family. They trust me, because I've never given them a reason not to. I've fed them when they were hungry, comforted them when they were scared, and protected them when they were vulnerable." "But they're predators," Nex protested. "Apex predators. Their neural pathways are hardwired for aggression and dominance." "So are human children, if you think about it," Nia said with a slight smile. "Ever watched a group of toddlers fight over a toy? The capacity for violence doesn't negate the capacity for love, Director. It just means you need to channel it properly." The klaxons suddenly stopped, leaving the nursery in blessed silence. A moment later, the station's communication system crackled to life. All clear. Emergency drill concluded. All personnel may return to normal duties. Repeat. Drill concluded. See? Nia said. Just practice. Though I have to admit, the timing was perfect for demonstration purposes. Nex stared at her, then at the sleeping areas, then back at her. Something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the universe, and he wasn't entirely sure he was comfortable with the implications. "Doctor," he said slowly, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your methods." The conversation Nex had been anticipating never got the chance to begin. The blessed silence that had followed the end of the drill lasted exactly 38 seconds before a different set of alarms began shrieking through the station's corridors. These weren't the measured, rhythmic tones of a practice exercise. They were the harsh, discordant wails that meant genuine, immediate danger. Hull breach detected. Security alert. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. The automated voice was different too, carrying the clipped urgency of a system that had detected something genuinely threatening. Emergency bulkheads began slamming shut throughout the station, the heavy thud of reinforced barriers echoing through the walls like a metallic heartbeat. "Well," Nia said, her casual tone at odds with the chaos erupting around them, "that's new." Nex's already elevated stress levels spiked into territory that his species' physiology wasn't designed to handle. His skin shifted to a pale, almost translucent blue, the Drakmari equivalent of going white with fear. "We need to evacuate," he said, his voice climbing toward panic. "If there's been a hull breach, the atmospheric systems could fail. And if those creatures are released during an emergency—" "They won't be released," Nia interrupted. But her attention was focused on a wall-mounted display that was showing the station's schematic. Red warning indicators were flashing across multiple sections, concentrated around the outer docking bays. The containment systems have independent power sources and triple redundancy. But she trailed off, her expression shifting from casual concern to something much more serious. The display was showing movement patterns that didn't match standard evacuation protocols. Instead of personnel moving toward emergency stations, there were organized formations advancing through the station's corridors. "Those aren't evacuation routes," Nex observed, his training in crisis management overriding his panic for a moment. "Someone's moving through the station in coordinated groups." "Someone who knows exactly where they're going," Nia agreed grimly. She tapped the display, zooming in on the movement patterns. "And they're heading straight for the high-value containment areas." The realization hit them both simultaneously. This wasn't an accident or a system failure. It was a raid. "Pirates," Nex breathed. "But how did they get past the defense grid? This station has military-grade shielding and automated weapon systems." "The Scarith Syndicate has been expanding their operations recently," Nia said, her fingers flying over the display controls. Intelligence reports suggested they were acquiring military hardware, but nobody thought they'd be bold enough to hit a council facility. The Scarith Syndicate was notorious throughout the outer systems for their willingness to tackle jobs that other criminal organizations considered too risky or too morally reprehensible. They specialized in acquiring rare and dangerous items for wealthy collectors who didn't ask too many questions about provenance. A facility full of juvenile apex predators would be exactly the kind of prize they'd risk everything to obtain. "The illegal fighting circuits pay enormous sums for creatures like these," Nex said, his analytical mind working through the implications even as his survival instincts screamed at him to run. "Adult specimens are too dangerous to transport. But juveniles can be conditioned," Nia finished, her voice carrying a cold anger that Nex hadn't heard before. "Broken down and rebuilt into gladiators for the entertainment of sadistic morons with too much money and too little conscience." The display updated again, showing that the intruders had reached the first of the containment levels. Emergency alerts began cascading across the screen as security systems engaged and were systematically disabled by someone who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. "We need to get to the emergency command center," Nex said. "Station security will need all the information we can provide about the facility layout and the creature's behavioral patterns." "No," Nia said quietly. "What do you mean, no? Doctor, we have a responsibility to—" "We have a responsibility to protect the children," Nia interrupted, turning away from the display. "And that's exactly what we're going to do." She was moving toward the nursery's control panel, her fingers dancing across interfaces that Nex hadn't even noticed during their earlier tour. The room's lighting shifted from emergency red to a softer amber, and the temperature began dropping by several degrees. "What are you doing?" Nex asked. "Waking them up properly," Nia replied. "If we're going to ask them to fight, they need to be at full alertness, not groggy from being startled out of sleep." "Fight?" Nex's voice cracked on the word. "Doctor, those are juveniles. They're not fully developed. Even if they were inclined to help, they're not equipped to handle armed pirates." Nia paused in her work and looked at him with an expression that was part sympathy, part pity, and part something that might have been amusement. "Director," she said gently, "I don't think you fully understand what juvenile means in the context of apex predators." Before Nex could ask for clarification, movement in the sleeping areas caught his attention. Fang was emerging from his alcove, but his posture was completely different from what Nex had observed earlier. Gone was the playful, pet-like demeanor. The Death Stalker moved with the fluid grace of a creature designed by evolution to be the perfect killing machine, every step calculated and purposeful. Spike followed, his crystalline form no longer cycling through pleasant colors. Instead, he was a study in sharp angles and barely contained energy, his internal light, pulsing with the steady rhythm of a predator's heartbeat. The gentle chimes of his contentment had been replaced by a low, harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. Whisper materialized fully, her shadow-dark form crackling with phase energy. But unlike her earlier defensive posture during the drill, this was something else entirely. She was alert, focused, and radiating the kind of predatory awareness that had made her species the stuff of nightmares across a dozen star systems. All three creatures turned toward Nia with expressions of perfect attention. They weren't looking to her for comfort or reassurance. They were waiting for orders. "Hello, my loves," Nia said, her voice carrying a tone that Nex had never heard before. It was still gentle, still affectionate, but underneath was something else. Authority. Command. The voice of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. "We have a problem," she continued, moving to stand in the center of the room where all three predators could see her clearly. "Bad people have come to take you away from our family. They want to hurt you, to make you fight for their entertainment, to break you down until you forget who you really are." Fang's tail began to twitch, the stinger extending and retracting in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained aggression. Spike's harmonic resonance shifted into a frequency that made Nex's bones ache. Whisper began to phase in and out of visibility, her form becoming increasingly unstable as her emotional state shifted. "I know you're scared," Nia said, though, to Nex's eyes, the three predators looked anything but frightened. "I know this isn't what we trained for, but remember what I've always told you. We protect our family. All of us. together. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the three creatures. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it carried clearly through the room. Protect the family. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Fang's posture shifted into a hunting crouch, his compound eyes beginning to glow with bioluminescent intensity. Spike's form began to extend upward, crystalline spikes emerging from his surface as his defensive systems fully activated. Whisper simply vanished, becoming nothing more than a barely perceptible distortion in the air. "Doctor," Nex whispered, backing toward the door. "What have you done?" "What I had to," Nia replied, standing up and moving to a wall panel that opened to reveal an array of equipment that definitely hadn't been mentioned in any of the facility reports Nex had read. These children have been living in safety and comfort for years, but they haven't forgotten what they are. They're apex predators, Director, and someone just threatened their pack. The sound of plasma fire echoed through the corridors outside, followed by shouting and the distinctive whine of energy weapons discharging. The pirates had reached their level of the station, and they were cutting through the security forces with the efficiency of professionals who had done this many times before. "The security teams won't be able to hold them," Nex said, his analytical mind working through tactical probabilities even as his survival instincts continued to scream. "The Scarith Syndicate uses military-grade equipment and enhanced soldiers. Station security is equipped for crowd control and accident response, not full-scale combat." "Then it's a good thing we have our own military assets," Nia replied, pulling what looked suspiciously like combat armor from the hidden panel. "Assets that the pirates have no idea how to counter." "You can't be serious," Nex protested. "You're talking about using children as soldiers." "I'm talking about letting my family defend itself," Nia corrected, sealing the armor around her torso. "These aren't helpless victims, Director. They're predators who have been raised with love and discipline instead of fear and brutality. They know the difference between a threat and a friend, between defense and aggression." The sound of cutting tools echoed from the corridor outside, the distinctive whine of industrial plasma cutters being used to breach the reinforced doors that led to the high-security containment areas. "They're almost through the outer barriers," Nex observed, his voice tight with fear. "Good," Nia said, checking the charge on what was definitely a military-grade plasma rifle. "Let them come." She looked at her three charges, who were arranged in what Nex suddenly recognized as a tactical formation. Fang had positioned himself near the door, ready to strike at anyone who entered. Spike had moved to a central location where his crystalline abilities could provide both offensive and defensive support. Whisper had vanished entirely, presumably moving into position for flanking attacks. "Remember," Nia said, her voice carrying the calm authority of a seasoned commander, "we protect each other. We work together. And we show these pirates exactly why you don't threaten a human's family." The cutting sounds stopped. In the sudden silence, Nex could hear the sound of heavy footsteps and harsh voices speaking in the guttural language of the Scarith Syndicate. "They're here," he whispered. "Yes," Nia agreed, raising her weapon and taking position behind cover. "They are." The door exploded inward in a shower of superheated metal and plasma fire. The first pirate through the door was a Korthani shock trooper, his exoskeleton gleaming with military modifications and his plasma rifle already tracking for targets. He was followed by three more, a mix of species united by their shared profession of violence and their complete lack of moral restraint. They moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had done this kind of raid dozens of times before. What they found was not what they expected. The nursery looked empty. Soft lighting, scattered toys, feeding, bowls, exactly what their intelligence had suggested they'd find. A child care facility for dangerous animals, probably defended by nothing more than automated security systems and maybe a terrified caretaker or two. The lead trooper gestured for his team to spread out, their weapons sweeping the room in standard search patterns. They'd been briefed on the creatures they were here to collect. Dangerous but juvenile, probably contained in specialized holding cells that they could simply blast open and extract the occupants from. They never saw Fang coming. The Deathstalker struck from above, having somehow positioned himself on the ceiling without making a sound. His stinger punched through the lead trooper's exoskeleton like it was made of paper, delivering a dose of neurotoxin that dropped the Korthani before he could even scream. The body hit the floor with a metallic crash that echoed through the room. The remaining 3 pirates spun toward the sound, their weapons tracking upward, but Fang was already gone, vanished back into the shadows with the liquid grace of a creature that had evolved to be the perfect ambush predator. "Contact!" one of the pirates shouted into his comm unit. "We've got active hostiles in the nursery. Repeat, active—" His transmission cut off as Spike's harmonic resonance shifted into a frequency designed to disrupt electronic equipment. The pirates' comm units squealed and went dead. Their targeting systems flickered, and the power cells in their weapons began to drain at an alarming rate. "What the hell?" another pirate began, just as Whisper materialized directly behind him. Her claws, phased to exist partially outside normal space-time, passed through his armor as if it weren't there and found the soft tissue beneath. He collapsed without another word. The remaining 2 pirates, professionals to the core, adapted quickly to the new threat parameters. They moved back to back, weapons raised, scanning for targets in a room that suddenly seemed full of deadly shadows. "Show yourselves," one of them snarled. "We know you're here." "Oh, we're definitely here," Nia said, stepping out from behind cover with her plasma rifle trained on the nearest pirate. "The question is whether you're smart enough to surrender before my children get really upset." The pirate's response was to swing his weapon toward her, finger already tightening on the trigger. He never got the chance to fire. Spike erupted from the floor, literally, his crystalline form having somehow merged with the station's structural elements, and his razor-sharp edges sliced through the pirate's weapon and most of his arm in one fluid motion. The scream that followed was cut short as Fang dropped from the ceiling again, this time delivering a precise, non-lethal dose of paralytic venom. The last pirate, seeing his entire team eliminated in less than 30 seconds, made the tactical decision to run. He spun toward the door, already reaching, for the emergency beacon that would signal the rest of the raiding party to abort the mission. He made it exactly 3 steps before Whisper phased through the wall directly in front of him. Her form was crackling with phase energy, her eyes glowing with an inner light that spoke of barely contained power. She didn't attack. She simply stood there, blocking his path, radiating menace like heat from a forge. The pirate stopped dead, his weapon trembling in his hands. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems and the gentle chiming sounds that Spike made when he was pleased with himself. "Now then," Nia said conversationally, keeping her weapon trained on the surviving pirate. "Let's talk about why you thought it was a good idea to break into my home and threaten my family." "You're insane," the pirate gasped, his eyes darting between the 3 predators who had just eliminated his team with casual efficiency. "Those things, they're supposed to be contained, controlled. They're animals." "They're my children," Nia corrected, her voice carrying a cold edge that made the pirate flinch. "And they're very protective of their family." Nex, who had spent the entire battle pressed against the wall in a state of shock, finally found his voice. "How many more are there?" he asked. The pirate's eyes darted toward him, then back to the predators who were still watching him with predatory intensity. "Dozen, maybe 15 more. They're working through the other containment levels." "Well," Nia said, checking the charge on her weapon, "I suppose we'd better go introduce ourselves." She looked at her 3 charges, who were arranged around the room in perfect tactical positions. Fang had returned to the shadows near the ceiling, his bioluminescent eyes providing the only indication of his location. Spike had resumed his more compact form, but was still crackling with barely contained energy. Whisper had become partially translucent, ready to phase strike at a moment's notice. "What do you say, loves?" Nia asked. "Ready for a family outing?" The response was immediate and coordinated. Fang chittered with what might have been excitement. Spike chimed a complex harmony that somehow managed to sound enthusiastic. Whisper made a sound like distant thunder, approval mixed with anticipation. "Excellent," Nia said, moving toward the door. "Director Nex, you might want to stay here and keep an eye on our guest. This could get messy." "Wait," Nex called after her. "Doctor, you can't seriously be planning to hunt down a military-equipped raiding party with 3 juveniles and a plasma rifle." Nia paused at the doorway and looked back at him. Her expression was patient, almost maternal, but there was something else underneath. Something that reminded Nex that humans had evolved as persistence hunters, creatures that could track their prey across continents and never give up. "Director," she said, gently, "I think you're still not understanding the situation. These aren't juveniles anymore. They haven't been for months. They're fully grown apex predators who have been raised in a loving, structured environment instead of the brutal wilderness of their homeworlds." She gestured to her 3 companions, who were waiting patiently for her to finish speaking before they began their hunt. "They're faster than their wild cousins because they've never known malnutrition. They're smarter because they've been educated and socialized. They're more coordinated because they've learned to work as a team instead of competing with each other for resources." The sound of plasma fire echoed from somewhere deeper in the station, followed by screams and the distinctive sound of something very large moving very quickly through metal corridors. "And most importantly," Nia continued, "they're absolutely furious that someone has threatened their family. So no, Director, I'm not planning to hunt down a military-equipped raiding party with 3 juveniles and a plasma rifle." She smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, Nex understood why the galaxy's most dangerous predators treated this human woman as their pack leader. "I'm planning to hunt them down with 3 fully grown apex predators who have been trained by humans. The plasma rifle is just backup." She stepped through the doorway, and her 3 children followed. Fang scuttled along the ceiling with liquid grace. Spike moved through the corridor with the steady determination of an avalanche. Whisper simply vanished, becoming nothing more than a barely perceptible distortion in the air. Within moments, they were gone, leaving Nex alone with an unconscious pirate, and the sudden, terrifying understanding that humanity's approach to xenobiology wasn't just revolutionary. It was absolutely devastating to anyone foolish enough to threaten a human's adopted family. The sounds of battle that echoed through the station over the next 20 minutes told a story of systematic, coordinated destruction. By the time station security arrived to restore order, they found the Scarith Syndicate's raiding party had been reduced to a collection of unconscious, paralyzed, or simply traumatized pirates who kept babbling about the monsters and the human witch. When the final report was filed, it would note that the facility's defensive capabilities had been severely underestimated by hostile forces. What it wouldn't mention was that the most effective defense system in the galaxy might just be a human with a talent for making family out of the universe's most dangerous creatures. And somewhere in the depths of space, word began to spread through the criminal networks. Don't mess with human wildlife preserves. The animals bite back.